Hello my loves, and welcome back to this here little bookish corner of the internet. I suppose that cements it. It's definitely an intro. Let me know if it sounds cringe or if you like it. Always talk to me, by the way, in the comments down below. It's my favourite part of doing this, is the interaction I get, especially with people who come back video after video despite my absolutely terrible uploading schedule. That does not mean that I don't love it, and that is why I am back here today with a very exciting video, at least in my opinion, because I want to tell you about something that I have been trying out since January and absolutely loving so far, and that is Book of the Month. You may have heard of this before, and if not, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a service that you sign up to that sends you a book of your choice every month. So every first of the month you go on the website and you choose from about 4 or 5 new releases. Most of the time they're new releases. Oh my god, this is what I was worried about. I've had some like weird allergies all week here in Arizona, and so if I sound like a prepubescent boy, I apologize, or a pubescent boy I should say. But anyway, Book of the Month is a service where every first of the month you pick from about 5 new releases, something that interests you. I most often pick the literary fiction pick, and they're reviewed by really thorough reviewers, and they're usually things I've heard of because I try and keep up to date with new releases, and they send you it in a beautiful package which takes about a week to arrive. And it's a Book of the Month edition of whatever book you've chosen. So it's got little engraved insignia on the actual book itself, and obviously the beautiful dust jacket which comes with the release anyway. And it's a really fun thing to be a part of, and it just makes me happy every single month. And it's a lovely thing that I got as a gift, so I don't even have to pay any money for it. So I just get a free book courtesy of my twin sister. I thought it would be nice to tell you about the 3 first books that I have got for the first 3 months of my subscription. I have now read them all. I am ready to tell you about them, and I have 3 months remaining in my subscription, and I plan on asking my wonderful twin sister to please, for our birthday, renew my subscription so I can have it for another 6 months because I love it so much. And also apparently after 6 months you get to become a reviewer yourself, and you get to be sent the releases that potentially would be on the website every month before they get to be on the website, to kind of pick the ones that would make the most sense to be there. And I would absolutely love to do that. So it is my intention to continue, but in the meantime I'd like to tell you about the first 3 books that I have gotten, because they have all been pretty successful. Some more than others, but I have enjoyed every single one of them, at least to a degree, and a lot of them have been things that I wouldn't ordinarily have picked up. So here we go, let's do it. Let's not waffle like I do every single one of my videos. No waffling. I like waffles, but I don't like waffling. By the way, this is me waffling, that makes sense. I'm teetotal today, only because I have just come back from a very nice dinner here in Arizona where I had a wonderful cocktail called a caipirinha. I will put up some kind of graphic / video of making it here because it is a really nice cocktail, and I think that if you drink and you haven't tried it, you absolutely should. It's my aunt's specialty. She always makes them in France when we have some kind of party to go to, so it was fun to have her specialty in the middle of a restaurant in Tucson, Arizona. My life is really weird. Anyway, so I have some water, and we'll just have to do watering books tonight. Book number 1 is a release that has gotten a lot of talk, and mostly highly positive, which it absolutely deserves, and that is Leni Zumas' second novel called Red Clocks. Now, I think the reason why this has gotten a lot of talk is because it is the 2 T's, timely and therefore terrifying. This takes place in a small town in Oregon, in an America which is supposed to be some kind of dystopian future, but feels very, very close to what could happen in the very near future. Roe v. Wade has been essentially nullified, and there's a thing called the Personhood Amendment, which basically gives embryos total rights to everything, the same rights as a fully grown human being. And therefore, obviously, abortion is illegal. Reproductive rights for women across the board are in a very, very dark place. And this is the Oregon that we live in when we get put slap bang in the middle of it at the start of this novel. And we follow essentially 5 women, one of whom is a woman in a very unhappy marriage. She's got some children and she's been living and married to the same man for a long time. And she's basically trying to find a way out. She also doesn't know her identity beyond being a wife and a mother. We also follow a teenage girl who finds herself in need of an abortion, and she is trying to find a way to make this happen for herself, except that one of the things that has happened in this dystopia is that there's a thing called the pink wall that exists between the US and Canada, so that women can't go to Canada to get abortions. And then we also follow a single teacher who is trying to get pregnant on her own through IVF, which is now illegal, except in very particular circumstances. And the 2 other women that we follow, one that is kind of off stage a lot of the time, and she is an explorer sometime in the 1800s, and she's doing a lot of research into ice, and she is being written about by the single teacher that I mentioned, who also kind of wants to be a biographer and have her works published. And then the 5th woman is this kind of holistic healer who is a hermit and lives in the middle of the woods, and she works with plants and fruit to kind of help women end pregnancies and also help them with any other manner of reproductive sicknesses, since she is very much outraged that that sort of care does not exist in the society that she lives in. People are very scared of her because she kind of comes across as this witch-like creature. So we have echoes of kind of almost the Salem witch trials in that sense. I really, really love this book. As I said, it really manages to feel so current, and as Leni Zumas has said in multiple interviews, every law that she's kind of built to exist in this world are not things that have come from her imagination. They are actual bills that have been suggested at one time or another by the men currently in government. And that is terrifying, because often when you're reading a dystopia, no matter how good it is and no matter how immersed you are in the story, you can always remove yourself from that and you can say, phew, thank God we don't live in that. And when you close the book, you can kind of close your eyes and you can tell yourself, I am thankful for the world that I currently live in, where none of that is a reality. And one of the great strengths of this book is that you never really had that reassurance when you were reading it and when you closed it. And then in that sense, it really stayed with you. Even whilst I was reading it, every night I would close the book and I would kind of really think about the ramifications of these things, were they to happen, and how close they are to happening in 21st century America, and how really the only thing that's going to stop them happening is our voices and our revolution and our willingness to put our foot down in terms of what we will and won't put up with. And whether or not that works is a whole nother debate, because I'm not sure that democracy is really a thing anymore at this point. But that was really the strength of this book, that it managed to build this world that really has echoes of our own, but still stood in its own right. And within that, one of the beauties of it was that these women's lives, in a sense, we were following them in the mundanity of life. So there's no culture war, there's no actual war in this book, there's no rising point of action where everything and everyone is getting hysterical and some huge thing changes. Really, we're just following them, trying to exist, and each with their own goals in this world. And that is what makes it terrifying. Because truly we can imagine ourselves, especially as women, in any of these situations that these women find themselves in. We can even, to an extent, imagine ourselves becoming a hermit and becoming the woman who makes the medications to give to everyone else, because that's the only way that you can possibly find to help the people around you. And I think in that it succeeded very well. The last thing that I really loved about it is the confidence that Leni Zumas has in you as a reader. This is something that I try and take notice of when I'm reading a book. Sometimes books will be so full of exposition and so full of ways of phrasing that are basically saying, this is what's happening, and if you're not clear about that, I'm just going to let you know explicitly that this is what's happening. And I like books that make me think a bit. I like books where for a while I might be a bit confused about what's happening, and then when I realize how everything is fitting together, I get a kind of satisfaction, and I know that the writer hasn't taken me for a fool, and I know that the writer trusts me to understand how all the puzzle pieces fit in her brain and lets me have that experience of them fitting in mine. And so I really wasn't taken for a very simple ride with this book, and I appreciate that. And it is so wonderful how all of these quite disparate women who are experiencing a lot of very different things in life at all different ages, all different types of people, their lives in this small Oregon town end up fitting, and not too neatly, very realistically I would say. And the journey is quite a joy, even though it's depressing as fuck. But I highly recommend. Leni seems like a wonderful lady, and I'm gonna go back and read her first novel as soon as possible. The second book I got is another beautiful new release hardback called An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. Now, allow me for a second to tell you of its origin story, and I will link the interview with Tayari Jones on, I believe, the Today Show down below, which tells the story better than I can ever tell it. But basically, the reason why she had this idea for this novel, she wanted to write about concepts. And I hear from a lot of writers that this is a problem, and this is definitely a problem that I face, mainly because I'm very bad at plotting. But I have these concepts that I want to write about, and I kind of know in a nebulous way how I would get from A to B, but I sort of feel that I need to attach characters to these concepts to make a story. And sometimes it's not that the characters appear fully formed in my head. And this is what Tayari Jones was saying, that she wanted to write about the prison system in America. She wanted to write directly about the effect that that has on families. She wanted to write in a way that hadn't been done before on wrongful imprisonment and the kind of consequences that that has on an intimate level rather than on a societal level. And she was only missing her characters. And one day she went to the mall, and as one does, she overheard a conversation at said mall, and it was someone saying to their boyfriend or husband, "Roy, you would never have waited for me for 7 years." And that was the light bulb moment for Tayari. She suddenly had her characters, and as such, these characters are called Roy and Celestial. They have been married a year and a half, so they are newly married, exploring who they are in their married identity, because as much as you retain your individual identity in marriage, and of course you do have to build the life that you have with your partner, and the kind of overlapping bit of your Venn diagram, which I have found particularly fun. I really do feel that we have managed to maintain our individual identities while exploring that shared bit of our Venn diagram, and I love it. But anyway, so they're doing it and figuring that all out, and in the grand scheme of life, they have not been married a long time when tragedy befalls them, and this is not a spoiler because it's on the back of the novel. One day they're in a hotel room and the police burst in and they accuse Roy of a terrible crime which everyone is certain that he did not commit, and he ends up serving a very long sentence in jail for said crime. So essentially Celestial is left without him, he is left without her, and they're existing in these two different worlds as this newly married couple. And the story, instead of being sprawling and you know, so much about the crime that he's been accused of and whether or not he did it. It's this very private story, and it really explores the kind of rippling effect that such a tragedy has on the couple and the immediate family, and what the hell you're supposed to do when something like a marriage gets interrupted by something that you have no control over. Are you supposed to try and move on? Are you supposed to try and make it work? What really is romance in that kind of circumstance? And I think that was what I liked most about it. It's kind of deconstruction of the idea of marriage as this fairy tale where as soon as you get married, everything is set to go right, and even if some things small go wrong, nothing major is ever going to happen. It kind of just does away with all that and makes us face how we would act if something like that happened to us. And then of course beyond that, it makes a point about race in America. The interesting thing with these characters is they are upper class black people. They do have, you know, a kind of upward social mobility, and they are not hurting for money, but they are black and in America. And when you get accused of a crime, even one that you didn't commit, and you're black and in America, your life isn't going to look great, even if you did have money. So that is kind of an interesting way to tell that story, because often in things like Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward, which is another thing that I want to talk about, there's a lot of discussion. I love that book, by the way. It was one of my favourite books of last year, but there's a lot of discussion about the way that the American prison system was built on slavery and all of that stuff, but it's from a different angle than looking directly and intimately into this family's life. So in that sense, I really, really enjoyed it, and it kind of forced me to look at the problem from a whole bunch of different angles. And the fact that it didn't choose to focus on his trial, and it didn't choose to focus on the crime, and it made it clear from the outset that he didn't do it, that no one thought he did it, and it was just kind of like what happens after that. That was really interesting to me. Another thing I loved is the fact that for about 50 pages, the novel is written in letters, Roy to Celestial, Celestial to Roy, to kind of highlight, I guess, the distance between them, and the fact that really this is the only way they have to communicate. I don't know, I suppose it made me sit for a while in what would happen if I could suddenly only communicate with my husband through letters, and what kind of thing we would say to each other, and how that would change our communication and our love. I love writing letters, so I like to think it wouldn't. We started our relationship long distance, and for 50 days I wrote him a postcard. So he has a stack of 50 postcards that I wrote him before we reunited. But that is an aside. I'm an expert in asides. The one thing that I would say, and I believe Russell said this in his review, and I promise I'm not stealing it, I just happen to agree with him, as the case a lot of the time, there is a third character named Andre who knows both Roy and Celestial, is an intimate friend of both of theirs, and kind of takes on another role in the trio at some point during the novel. And we hear from Roy's perspective, from Celestial's perspective, and from his perspective. And I agree with Russell that that was kind of not needed. I just cared more about Roy and Celestial's story. I thought the prose was better written. I thought Andre's voice was not different enough from Roy's or Celestial's to make it particularly needed. There were times when I kind of wanted the prose to go a bit further than it did. I understand why it was simple, because it was kind of relying on its simplicity to discuss a bunch of concepts and make us feel a bunch of things. And I don't believe in prose that's too flowery, but I do like a bit of poetry, and that was sort of missing for me. But that's the only bugbear that I would say. I read it really quickly. I was really taken by the story and the characters, and I'm glad I read it. And actually, speaking of sparseness of language, that brings me nicely on to my third and most recent book of the month, which was Rainbirds by Clarissa Goenawan, which has a really beautiful cover and a really intriguing premise. I wonder if it says anything when you start a review about the cover. But anyway, it has a really intriguing premise. We follow Ren Ishida, who has just lost his sister to a violent crime. And he is living in Tokyo, and he has no idea what happened to his sister or why she was this victim of this crime. And so he decides to move for a while to the little town that she moved to kind of be a little bit of a detective, I guess, and figure out what happened to her. And through a weird set of circumstances, he ends up pretty much adopting her persona. He ends up moving into the place where she lived. He ends up working temporarily at her old job as a teacher in a cram school, as they call it in the book, which I guess is a school specifically for kids who are struggling to keep up with the curriculum. During the time where he's kind of experiencing all of the things that she experienced so far away from him in Tokyo, he's hoping to gain a better understanding of where she might have been in life and what might have led to this awful crime that killed her. Now, that strikes me as the most intriguing premise, and I can't lie to you, this book took me on a journey in the sense that I finished it really quickly. It wasn't hard to read. I really did want to pick it up every time I did. But it just wasn't enough for me. I wanted to feel closer to him, either to Ren or to Keiko, his sister, who is obviously not alive anymore, but she is still a character in the story because she's very much this presence that he is trying to live life through to try and figure out. And I wasn't close to either of them. And I think part of that was purposeful in the sense that it feels like the author was maybe trying to achieve a kind of aloofness and weirdness and sort of magical realism-ish sparseness that would be akin to like Murakami and that type of stuff. And I love Murakami. I haven't read all his, but I feel like a lot of people who love Murakami read all his books obsessively, and I haven't. I've just read a few, but I did really enjoy them. And in a way, this book kind of reminded me of Murakami in kind of a good way, in that I liked the sort of dreamlike feel, but it was just so aloof, and I don't feel like I really identified with our main character, Ren. He also makes some questionable decisions. One of his students takes a liking to him, and he kind of takes a liking to her, and he's like a 35-year-old man and she's a 17-year-old woman, and I'm just not sure about that. It made me feel a little icky. I thought the premise was so exciting, and this idea of taking on this crime in a really psychological, intensely personal way. It could have been, you know, a meditation on grief and like how that clouds your judgment and your ability to kind of be impartial. And I got glimpses of that, I really did, and there were some bits that really touched me, and the journey of realization that he goes on about who his sister was and how much he had missed out on, and what it is to be a younger brother who really looks up to his older sister and holds her in the highest regard, almost as this kind of story-like character that didn't really exist in reality, and now she is gone from that reality and everything that that means. And I think on some level I got a lot of that. I just had to work pretty hard for it, and so I think I would have preferred it if I was just more intensely close to my main character, or any of them really. But I liked it in some aspects stylistically, and I think the author definitely has promise, and I will be looking out for things that she does in the future. But this one just slightly fell short of my expectations. And there you go. That brings us to the end of the Book of the Month Club books that I have received so far. If you like this video, I will definitely let you know what I receive in my last 3 months, and then if I extend beyond that, I can make this a semi-regular 3 books per video thing. If you would like to join Book of the Month, I will leave some info in the description. I am not sponsored or affiliated with them, but I think they're really great. So if you're in the US and you would like to read any of these books that I've mentioned, or any of the ones that might be forthcoming, then I highly recommend. Let me know if any of these books sound good. Have you read Red Clocks, An American Marriage, or Rainbirds? And let me know what you think of them. I would much like to know if you have read Rainbirds and disagree with me about some of the things that I wasn't sure about. And in general, I just want to know how you are, what you're reading, what you've been up to. And I will see you very soon in my next video. Thanks. I caught him for once in my life.